Alright guys, so this is going to be my first week review of Lambda School. It's actually Saturday. I finished the sprint yesterday. What I'm going to start off is I'm going to talk about my tips and tricks. Just other tips for students that struggled in week one, or students that are, also going to be starting week one and wanted to know what it was like. Then I'm just going to go over each day in more specific detail. And then lastly, I'm going to bring up a couple final questions and a couple of other items moving forward. And then finally, I'm just going to talk about what I'm going to do for next week's preparation, and just like if other students are also interested in also trying to get ahead. So the first order of business is learn how to ask questions. So you can just see right here, don't ask to ask, just ask. A lot of times I see in the Slack, people just like, hey, anyone do XYZ, or anyone know this, or these are horrible questions. I know that like there's no stupid questions. There are stupidly framed questions. I think that's the point that I'm trying to get at. But basically the long story short is that this is bad form. And I know this is a lot more to ask, but like if you can be more specific with your question, or if you can also like lay out what you are asking instead of just like blindly asking for help, you're more likely to get answers. If you just even look, when they ask generic vague questions, like no one wants to answer, right? Because it's too much of a commitment. There's too many unknown factors. It's just an unmotivating thing to try and help them. If you're just very specific, we're more willing to help. And I know that there's TLs, people who are actually paid to help you in Lambda School, but you can also make their life easier. And sometimes you don't even need to escalate it to a TL. Maybe there's another student that also has the same exact problem as you, and they know how to answer it, and they're very willing to help you. But if you make a generic vague question like this, then not going to help. And then this brings up a second problem, is that if you don't know what to ask or where to even ask questions, then I think you should look at why not. You should look at how come you don't know the question you want to try and asking it. Sometimes even trying to formulate the question you want to ask solves the problem for you, because then once you know the specific question, you can just throw it into Google, and that can also just save a lot of effort on other people's parts. You can also just self-teach yourself. Knowing what you don't know is already sometimes half the battle. So that would be the first thing I want to say. Just don't ask to ask, just ask. So the second tip that I would have, this actually kind of caught me off guard and expected, was that get a second monitor at minimum. I don't know how students with one monitor can manage, or I guess I can see how, but it just seems like a lot of wasted effort. I guess if you're going to be in school for I don't know. If you were in school, right, most of the times, if they allowed laptops, you could have a notebook. You could just have a lot of real estate. But when it's like a developer school that's all online like Lambda, it's kind of a different story. Just get a second monitor. It just helps. You can get like cheap monitors, cheap refurbished monitors for like $50 to $70. And then when you get to 100, you can get a brand new monitor that's actually, decent. If you can get a third monitor, this is like purely luxury. So this is like my setup right now. But if you got a third monitor that you have on portrait mode, you can have it in portrait mode, and this just makes reading VS Code, Slack, other stuff easier. Now that's overkill. That's why I'm considering it. That's why I'm calling it luxury. If you have a reason to make use of that real estate, then, and two monitors, you can definitely make use of it. Day one, our instructor has a method where she, has Slido, Zoom, and then your own personal workspace. Like if you want to code along, like on VS Code, or have your code pen up, and sometimes Slack. You're not going to be using all four of these at once, which is why you can manage with one monitor. But it's just, you have to like alt tab between them, or if you're on Mac, you have to slide between different workspaces, which is a little bit of a tricky thing to get used to. And even if you are used to it, that's just more attention that you just have to pay effort into when you should just be learning, right? Just like try to clean out all the clutter and try to clean out all the difficulties when you're actually trying to learn. Then the third generic tip I have is just know your tools. It's actually kind of caught me off guard, was that VS Code wasn't mentioned in the student guide. It was mentioned in the training kit, but when you try to learn the tool the day of VS Code, you're not going to get a lot of guidance. And I'm not saying that VS Code is hard to pick up, but just learn to get comfortable with those basic tools can just help you save so much time, because when you're struggling with it, like if you don't even know how directories work or basic computer knowledge, that just decreases your probability of being able to keep up, right? The more tiny things you have to learn along the way, the harder it is. I wouldn't say it's like not knowing VS Code is a make or break thing, because it's easy to pick up, but when you need to pick up like 10 different things and juggle them around on top of the curriculum, that's harder. So the next other part is with VS Code, also just try and get prettier. Obviously, you can see that my markdown embed failed here because I'm bad at markdown, but this is basically it's just a formatter. It's an extension that comes in VS Code. I have it over here. So for example, let's just take one of the projects, right, that I did on Wednesday. Let's just say if I tab this out and I didn't notice it, I can just save and it automatically formats it for me, right? So I don't have to keep track of how many times I've tabbed something. If I just save it, it just auto formats. It's just a nice way to get nice feedback to see if you miss something close, like say if I forgot to close this nav and I tried to save it, right? And one of these anchor tags is all the way out, because the nav bar is closed, it can like kind of identify. Well, I can also use the syntax highlighters that VS Code shows me that it's complaining. But like my expectation was that it would auto format, and it didn't. So then that probably says like, oh, just something wrong with like, you know, my code somewhere. So that's why I thought it's extremely useful. Prettier is very helpful. And you might not prefer to have it format on save. I do. There's also another, you could just, I think the default key binding is Control-Shift-P to have it auto format everything. But I just prefer it because I save a lot, so I always want to have it auto formatted. Now going on with know your tools, this was a big one in Slack. Pardon my French, but holy shit, people, learn to use threads on Slack. It becomes unreadable. It sucks because like, say that I want to, you know, just keep track of what Brit is saying in Slack, or I want to see what questions she asked the day of because she asked the relevant question and I wanted to know what the answers to that were. Some students just don't fucking post in the thread, and maybe some of them it's just they're doing it accident at a time, but it's actually kind of infuriating because it becomes unreadable. I would have to scroll up, right? I have to scroll up multiple times instead of just having it there for me. Just like use a thread. And then second of all, if you miss the thread, because I know mistakes and typos happen, then delete your useless comment. No one wants to see that shit, right? Like the only thing I know is that senior leads, also I don't know what senior leads do, but so far I know that they're just gonna comment, put a thread on your, they're gonna comment thread. It's actually kind of becoming a meme. I'll talk about more of that later, but it's just thread emoji is probably the most used emoji so far in the Slack, which is kind of sad. But really, you know, like section leads can then focus on other middle management duties than just reacting with the spool of thread to your mistake. Sorry if I just come off as a little bit hostile here, but it was just actually annoying because first day, whatever, second day, whatever. When it still happened on the third day, at that point, I'm just like, all right, this is like actually pathetic. Guys, just use threads. That's like big part of the etiquette here. And if you don't use threads, then delete your comment. Oops. Then the next part that I want to talk about was get familiar with Emmet. This is once again knowing part of your tools with VS Code. I can actually show this YouTube video later. I'll put it below. But it basically is like an autocomplete, a more intelligent autocomplete for your VS Code. And then last one, this was credit to my TL, Amy. Shout out to her. She says, you know, go through VS Code. I'm using Windows, right? You don't have to memorize all these shortcuts, but what you should do is like once every couple days or so, just pick one or two shortcuts that are interesting to you. Maybe you don't go to the end of the line, go to the end of the file a lot. Maybe you're just like, maybe like before this, you would just scroll through to get to the end, but you can just press Control-N to get to the end. I think that pick one or two shortcuts and just try to slowly incorporate them, get into the habit. When you try to like pick like 20 shortcuts at a time, you're not going to remember any of those shortcuts. And it helps for navigation, because I know that when I was helping some students, they were not familiar with computers as much or using their keyboard, and they would just write something up, then they would use the mouse to click on this tiny thin little bar to scroll down, and that just wasted time. It's just far less efficient. It's also just painful for other people watching your screen share code as you're trying to fiddle with your mouse. Like, I mean, Apple makes great trackpads, but you know, it's just completely unnecessary when you can just use a keyboard, which kind of actually follows into another tip that I forgot to add. But just like try to avoid using your mouse as much as possible. Like learn to like go in between workspaces, learn to use Alt Tab. If you know, do Control page up, page down, you can switch between tabs instead of trying to click on this tab and click on that tab. It just makes navigation so much easier because you don't have to move your hand and then move the mouse around. The less you could touch your mouse, the better it is, to be honest. Then the last big tip I would have for most students is read the readmes, especially for the sprints. This is probably dangerous advice and might get yelled at a TL for it, but I was just told when it comes to sprints, since they're like tests, you can look but don't touch. The biggest thing with sprints is they're designed to help TLs and the school get a measure of your ability. So obviously if you're working on this early, you're ruining their testing methodology. But I think that it's completely fair game to read it and see what you're getting into. So like, you know, the week before, try to read the readme, and if something doesn't make sense, whatever, but just try to get an understand of what goal you need to meet at the end of the week, right? Like, because it's very hands-on and build based. So if you're just gonna look at, all right, can I meet these objectives that it gives to me at the end of the week? That's fine, that's perfect. You can even read it like Thursday before and then do some quick brushing up the next morning after to make sure that you're ready to actually do what the build is. But once again, like, you know, you can look but don't touch. Don't fork it too early. And obviously commits have a timestamp to them so they can tell if you're just trying to cheat the system or not. Besides, you're only really just cheating yourself because this lets them give you accurate feedback. It's not like you're gonna get punished for getting a 1 once, right? If you get 1 multiple times on sprints, then that's a problem. But like if you get a 1 once, that's tells them that, hey, look, we need to give you more attention and focus. And if you're trying to cheat yourself so you don't get attention, then you're just, you're cheating yourself. Okay, so that wraps it up for my tips, tricks. And now I'm just going to go more into detail about my reflection for each day. So if you don't want to care about me, then just move on. For day one, right, we met our instructor, Britt. Overall, Britt's a good instructor, to be honest. She described things. I was able to understand them. And I'm not sure, but she's very soft-spoken. So there were times that was kind of hard. And I could turn up the volume, but there were times when I was almost like falling asleep during the 2 to 3 hour lecture. And what helped me a lot was just actually I just played music at half volume. So I like write this, like on my Spotify, I would play like Good Mood Piano, or I would play something like the Chill Hop Cafe. I hate this name, sounds cringy, but Chill Hop Cafe, right? Those playlists. And it suited her voice really well. And for me, it was almost easier to focus. It would almost felt like I was watching a YouTube video or / podcast where they had just like relaxed background music. So that helped me personally a lot. Obviously, if you don't want music in the background, then I don't highly suggest that. And then the next part that I realized with that, thread emojis they're like a meme, man. It's once again, it's hard to see how bad it is unless you actually see the chat. But the best way I can lay it out is that sometimes she'll post questions in Slack and students will try and respond, and out of 160, 5% will miss the thread. And sometimes that would scroll up and all the questions that she would have would just get bloated or like scrolled away, so it would just be hard to follow. Or if you wanted to read it for review, it would also be hard to follow. Now, and that's once again, I can never just, because I thought it was amusing by day one, and it was amusing again on day two, and then at day three I was just disappointed. Now, going back to Slido, Zoom, Workspace, and Slack, she asked you to use 4 apps. Well, once again, you don't have to have all 4 open, but this kind of goes hand in hand with 2 monitors. It's just very, very difficult. You're just making your life harder if you just use 1 monitor. One interesting I noticed that Slido is the app that she uses, so students can ask questions anonymously, and I think that has its pros and cons. The cons came actually in at a later date. It's nice because students don't know a thing and they want to be embarrassed. They can just toss in the question, which I think is completely fine. That's a good use for it. It is kind of annoying though, and I can actually, it's not annoying. I can see why she prefers Slido, because once again, students are missing things on Slack. So if a student asks a question on Slack, it's almost impossible to find it. So Slido's kind of a nice alternative due to the clusterfuck that Slack is at times. And also we started Git on day one, which was great because I think they were kind of being very aggressive in teaching us Git, which I think is admirable and I think came from good intentions. But I can just imagine that if I didn't have experience on the command line or Git, I would have been really the material on Git seemed harder than what we were taught on day one, and the material on Git also seemed on equal or on par as the difficulty on day two, and day two was actually kind of a wreck for some students. Day two was a big spike in difficulty because we were taught to use display inline properties at CSS, which was like the quote unquote legacy way of formatting things on a website. And I think it was the intention was that it was to show that, hey, this is how people did it previously. And if you have to maintain a legacy website, we're now going to show you how to use this old method. But I mean, I don't know if we had to spend a whole entire day on it, right? Because there was a joke that, hey, like we made you suffer through this because so you can have great appreciation for how we do modern techniques like Flexbox, which is good and good intention, but we don't need to suffer like 8 hours of this thing, right? And I know some people working on it for like, I don't know, till like 11 p.m. at night. I think they got the message at 6 p.m. 5 hours ago that this is difficult and annoying and frustrating to use. I think that on the same note, it's not like we're learning HTML3 or CSS1 to just realize how awesome HTML5 and CSS3 is. I think that we could have just spent more time on Git on day two, or we could have just moved into Flexbox on day two and just be like, hey, this is how we did it back in the day, but now we have a better method, which is Flexbox. So I think that it was a good spike in difficulty. I'm just not sure if it was necessary, right? That's the point I want to get at. I'm not sure if students needed to struggle with this old method for as long as they needed to. Oh, and this is a section I had on Brit. She's a good instructor. I think she has a lot of good patience. What I really like is that she has this ability now to just navigate bad questions. Well, I guess I could go more quote unquote bad questions on day 3 and also on day 5. And this is the part where I talked about where I play music at half volume during lectures to help stay awake. User interface on day 3, we submitted a project with forked branching. And one of the things I've noticed was that I think it would have been better if we just spent on week 1 to not do forking. I think that students should have made a GitHub account and then just push to origin. You know, they would just make a bunch of pushes and they would push to the master. That's it. They just no forks, no nothing. Because I mean, these simple projects, they just need to learn that Git at the most basic stage is a more powerful form of redundancy. It's a more powerful Dropbox. Because I know a lot of students, when they were in college or high school even, they use Google Documents to collaborate with other students, right? To have a unified single repository, like to work on an essay together or on a group project or PowerPoint slides, and graduate them to that conceptual level. And then next week on the second week sprint, then show them branching, just to get familiar with what they're doing first, so that each commit is saving their progress so they can go back at a certain point in time. I don't know. I'm not sure if forking or branching was necessary to have learned. It's necessary to have learned before you end Lambda. I'm just not sure if it needed to be this early. I think that maybe at least one sprint could have at least just had a code review that didn't need a PR. Because I mean, I think TLs can just look on your commit history and then do the code review that way before needing to actually merge it and everything. So I would have preferred to have seen Git been a little bit more spread out. And I think that Git is supposed to be mastered before you learn advanced JavaScript, or not advanced JavaScript, before you even start on JavaScript. We don't even start JavaScript until the third week in, right? We still have one more week of CSS. So that would have been, I think, a great time to have talked about merging branches and merge conflicts and whatnot. And also, speaking of Git, I think that this website, Git How To, oh, sorry, I had a dark mode on this, but I think that this website, Git How To, this should just flat out replace all the curriculum that's on the training kit. I went through it in my free time, and I thought it was way more intuitive and better to learn than the entire section in the TK. It just felt way better to me. And maybe I'm also biased because I went through the TK material first, so I got additional knowledge, and this is why it seems simpler, why the Git How To website seems simpler. So once again, take my suggestion with a grain of salt, but I really do feel like this was just way easier. The minimum to understand this material, though, is a higher minimum than what's on the training kit. Does assume you are a little bit familiar with some existing command line problems, but in that case, my opinion would just be to still axe all the Git stuff on the TK, teach them command line stuff, and then link them to this website. Like, I just think that was just better. Also, I'm not sure if it would be a bad look on Lambda's end if instead of having internal curriculum, they just outsource the resource to Git How To. But I mean, I know colleges do that already because, you know, the stuff you can find on the website, the personal projects of other people, is far superior than to like the custom quote unquote gourmet curriculum that the college offers. I think this resource was really good. This resource was great. Would highly recommend it. It's just githowto.com. And then that brings us to day 4, where this was kind of interesting day. So we were now actually learning the command line, and we were also learning Git, which was kind of, I mean, I guess this was the best summary of the day. The Slido read like a YouTube comment section or a Twitch chat. There was a lot of backseating in Slido. And at one point I was just like reading the responses on Slido and on Slack, and I'm just like, people weren't even using it to ask questions. They were using it for commentary, which was, I think, I don't know, maybe that's because you can be anonymous, so you can just make these comments without like looking like an asshole. But, or maybe that wasn't their intention. Maybe they weren't trying, like, maybe, you know, most of the time it's just that they're just not maybe they're just not self-aware. Yeah, because these people are enthusiastic to share their knowledge. They've been spending the past 1, 2, 3 days learning Git, as well as learning command line. Or maybe they're just like, you know, had a lot of experience because they have like Linux experience, and this is what they were learning. But just like, let her teach the lesson, right? There was just a bunch of commentary. I mean, at one point, what I want to say was that Britt gave us a 5-minute break, 25 minutes right after we took our last break. And judging from her voice or tone, it sounded like she was taking the break more than giving us the break due to like the nature of these questions. I got secondhand annoyance just from reading it. So I don't know, maybe it's not my place to like call out these people, but that was just my experience reading as a student. I'm just like, it was just distracting, you know, the questions being asked, they weren't real questions. I don't think it actually contributed a lot. So kudos to Britt for navigating that. At one point, I think while we were running Git commands and inside Git bash, I think Britt got stuck in Vim. I wasn't sure if that was like a meta level mistake that she made, like Britt was pretending to be stuck in Vim, because that's a common like joke when you're working at command line. Sometimes you'll and Vim is a type of text editor that's built into the command line, and because it's a text editor where you can edit and write comments, some people won't know how to escape out of that, right? They won't know how to quit Vim. So I don't know if she was like making this as a joke by asking by quote unquote getting stuck in Vim, but you know, then she asked, and then people you know, told her how to get out of it. Overall, I just thought it was funny that she got stuck in Vim, because that is actually a common thing from what I've heard about. Then day 5 was the sprint day. It was actually kind of fun. The sprints overall, I think, went very well, and this was like the first test. There's a time limit on there, and I think that I don't think the time limit is necessary from a learning perspective, but it is necessary from a logistical perspective, because at one point tests need to end, right? So I think the timer was completely fair. They didn't ask you to do anything outside of the realm, anything crazy. And if you want to know where the sprint is, they're actually, all the sprints are publicly available on Lambda's repo on GitHub. In fact, I even linked it earlier today here, right? When read the readmes. This was the sprint challenge. This is what we did. Once again, though, look, you can look, but you can't touch. You know, you basically had to build this. It just missed the header and it missed the banner. And then you had to color these boxes, as well as also style the about page, as well as give the about page a header. Overall, it was fairly straightforward, but once again, I had my own background on where I studied before the weeks leading up to Lambda, so I didn't feel like I was under a lot of pressure. Overall, I think the sprint, this was the first sprint, there wasn't much to say about it. There wasn't much for me to learn from the sprint. The other comments that I wanted to bring up was talking about team leads, and I'm just curious about how the team lead structure works, and if you guys can comment down below or just respond in Slack, how do team leads even work? So this is what I understand about TLs. TLs get paid about roughly $12 an hour or ish so. And what team leads are, they're basically every student in Lambda is grouped underneath a team lead who is actually a student themselves. And we'll get more about that later. They'll go into your code, they'll grade it, they'll look at, they'll make comments, and they're kind of just be like your school assigned mentor. I think that the ratio of TLs to students is excellent in Lambda. I think that's one of their greatest strengths because it's about like 8-to-1. This mentor just has way more time to dedicate themselves to each student. And then on top of the team leads, you have senior leads. And I think due to the size of our cohort and the amount of team leads we had 2 senior leads or section leads, whatever they're called. I don't know what they do. I don't know what section leads do. I know Winnie, God bless her. I know Winnie comments all the time in Slack about, she responds to people's stray comments that should be in a thread. That was like my only interaction with Winnie. And Ty, I have no idea what Tyler does. But I know they're section leads, so they're probably interacting with the TLs more than the students. But going back to the TLs, so the TL model, as I said, is they're students of Lambda. Let's say that a TL was just a normal student in Web 21 and they got ahead to a point, but they felt like they want to spend more time learning the curriculum because, you know, the Lambda pace is fast and a lot of students end up wishing that they could have more time to absorb the curriculum. Lambda set up a model for them where they can go back. I'm not sure if this is like Lambda's original idea, but overall it's a very good idea. They can go back and mentor students in an upcoming cohort. So all of the TLs here are students of Lambda, but they're mentoring us in Web 23. And I think that's a great model. The students who are TLs have additional time, and to teach something is to master it, right? By teaching us, they're helping solidify the curriculum before, and that since they're already students who went through the curriculum, they at least have some experience to teach us. Okay, so what I want to know is, how do you become a TL, right? If you're a student who actually did badly, like, is there academic requirements of being a TL? Because what happens if you're a student who just, you know, failed a sprint and then you had to redo something? Do you just get recycled into being a TL? Because then, I'm hoping not. I have no, once again, I'm asking this question because I have no idea into the transparency, but I hope to God that there aren't TLs who did badly in a section that are now teaching us, because that could easily lead into a situation where you have the blind leading the blind. So far, Amy, my TL, has been wonderful. Cannot stop talking about how useful she has. She notices that students that might be a little bit more familiar with the material, so she'll give tips on how to stay ahead of the material, or then she'll spend some time helping those who struggled with the material. I think there's good motivations to being a TL because they enjoy teaching and then they want more time to digest the material that they studied before. So I think that's great. But then I don't know, maybe then there's also the other part about being a TL. It's just like, are there TLs who just decided because they ran into a life situation where they just needed the income instead of going forward? Because it seems like the opportunity cost that you give up to become a TL for just purely financial reasons is not worth it. Like $12 is not a lot of money. $12 an hour is not a lot compared to employability after you graduate. So I don't know why. I don't think it's a good idea to become a TL for the money. At least that's my motivation. I would like to assume that all the TLs wanted to become TLs because they either wanted to enjoy teaching and also that they wanted more time to practice the material they were learning. So that's why they would, you know, delay their graduation a bit. They would flex their graduation to a more flexible date and, you know, step back and become a TL. I just hope that there are academic requirements or minimums to becoming a TL because, once again, I don't want the blind leading the blind. And now moving forward, Amy, once again, shout out to her. She gave a good suggestion where that if you already are experienced with HTML, CSS, just you can never get too much JavaScript practice because you need to be a master of one language to get through interviews, right? She recommended 30 days of JavaScript to me. I'm probably gonna try that in my free time leading up. I mean, obviously it says 30 days of JavaScript, but you can do more than one activity a day. Try doing that, hopefully wrap that up before we get into advanced JavaScript a month from now. And then you can also just, apparently there are old build week projects, and build week is the whole entire week where you spend working on a professional level product that, you know, that's like a shining piece, centerpiece on your GitHub portfolio. And that there are build week projects that fall into legacy. They don't use it anymore. So she says that you could just go ham on it, right? Just dig in. There's no time limit on those because they're now using a different model or a different build week project for your class. So that's what I was also going to do. If for some reason that 30 days of JavaScript ends early, I might just try the construction company build week. Yeah, lastly, ignore this week one feedback. This is something that I'm drafting to put into front desk. Okay, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it or found that insightful. I'll probably come in next week with the vlog update. And if there isn't really anything to update about, then, you know, you probably won't hear from me.